Thank you, John. So thanks for coming. You'll see the title there. I'll kind of weave this in a little later. But I did want to kind of make preliminary comments. Thanks for coming. It's kind of a weird, night of homecoming. It's like the beginning, but it's Thursday night. So glad that you're here. I'm going to try. I see that clock over there, so I'm trying to keep myself to 45 minutes. Usually we have the McMurry homecoming show right after this, so it's not till Friday. But I think there's something at ACU with a choral group or something, maybe at 7:30. But I'm going to try to stay within a 45-minute frame, Q&A, and then we'll have a little reception downstairs in terms of that. So, and hopefully we could be out and you'd be enjoying Abilene by 7:15. So John mentioned this is my second time to make this presentation. And the first time, and I kind of played with the prompts. The prompt was, what would you like to talk about? Which is, that for a professor, that's a pretty good prompt. And I went with my life and crime and kind of played with, as a sociologist, how did I get interested in studying the wrongfully convicted? But this time the prompt was different. And this it comes from Terry. And it was like, what have you learned about McMurry's 1931 graduate Dan Dobson, who was a sociology professor at NYU? So I go, yeah, it's more direct, but it's also it's still intriguing to me because she knew kind of my particular interest. So therefore, we may get out at 9 and not at 7:15. So, because I've had quite a lot of time to kind of think about it, but I have kind of assumptions, and in some sense, this is like a kickoff event, like the Thursday for homecoming, and I wanted to do something that would kind of literally celebrate what McMurry is all about. And I am a sociologist, so I've just been trying to, what could I do that could kind of bring in individual celebration, but also institutional celebration. So that's kind of one of the assumptions. And I'm not, somebody may want to challenge this, but I am going to kind of make this argument. And I don't do it to just, to be controversial or whatnot, or, but I want to make that statement that I think Dan Dobson is literally, if you give me a chance to talk for about 30 minutes, that I think is possibly the biggest individual celebration that we could do, that we could all say he's a product of McMurry. Now, other assumptions, I kind of played with, different audiences, different titles, and I first thought, man, some of you, he is truly a sociologist, and that's a very narrow audience. In fact, Jory wrote me a minute ago and said she wouldn't be here, so that would be the other sociologist in the room. But she knows exactly what that means. Some of you wouldn't know what this was, but I toyed with that. And the enduring American dilemma, which is interesting, but it's also kind of a narrow focus. And then I started kind of playing with, Dan Dobson and thinking about turning points of his particular life and career. But literally, when I got this, and I remember writing Laura and going, oh my word, you just gave me my title, because I wanted to kind of celebrate individual in our institution, and truly wanted to make the argument that Dan Dobson is a McMurry-made individual, which I think a lot of people in this room literally would be, if you're an alum. But I also made, I think this is probably where Terry kind of prompted me on this, is, how did he get on my radar? If you've been here 35 years, then you started teaching in 1990. So literally came in 1990. Did not know this at the time, but Dan Dobson dies in 1995. And I think this is pretty legitimate. About 1996, we started baseball back up, and a trustee, and pretty sure it was Ralph Turner. I saw him the other day at the inauguration. But he asked me something like this. Okay. Man, as soon as As soon as he says a former sociology professor at New York University, it got my attention. I had just come from Columbia University, so had spent 6 years in New York City. And so I think that's probably why Ralph was asking me, did I know who this guy was? I had to say I had not ever heard of this guy. And I'd been teaching here for 6 years and had never heard the word. But I knew since he was a NYU professor that there's a very good chance that he'd have obituary in the New York Times. And that's what I did when I got out of the trustee meeting. I went over and got this 1995 obituary of Dan Dobson. You will not be able to see it very well, but I'm just going to kind of use it and kind of play off of some biographical stuff and then jump off from there. But this is 1995, Dan Dobson, 88, foe and scholar of racism. And I'll use this obituary off and on later on, but some kind of biographical snippets that come up out of that. He's described as a Texas sharecropper son. Interesting that it says he got his early education at his local Methodist church. And they misspell McMurry, but they do say in that obituary, later worked his way through McMurry College in Abilene. Died in Austin, Texas, which definitely got my interest because I did not know that. And he had been living in Texas since 1972. And he was described as a tall, rangy white man with a deep Southern accent. Now, that picture is on the program. I saw this, but there's this photograph. You can't really see that, but I cut it off. It's on your program, so you miss the impact. But I don't know how tall he is, but this is a 1957, and you can't really see that. It's pretty, the photograph. Here's Dan Dobson right here, and I just saw Gary Shannon come in. How tall do you think Cook was?
I have no idea.
Think he's 5'6", 5'7"? Pretty sure that's him right there.
Yeah.
I think Dan Dobson's probably about 6'3". So he's definitely tall, lanky guy. And at the end of the thing, if we have time, I'm going to play a minute of this clip where he's actually talking, and literally probably he'd been in New York for over 25 years, and I still hear a Southern Texas accent in terms of him literally talking. So I never got to meet him, so definitely want to make that particular comment. But I have been able to kind of trace his life through different documents that I've come across, literally kind of picking up particular stuff. So I kind of really thought, kind of, who is this guy? Why do I contend he was McMurry made? And I'm gonna make an argument that he could be considered the most important McMurry alum. Hi, Dr. Monk. How are you, Bob? Here's some photographs of him over his years, and I was able to find different points. But here he is when he was at McMurry. But I'll kind of use this off and on. But the thing that notice there is that he's born in 1907. So I'm going to argue, modest beginnings. And since Jessica's here, he is first gen before we ever said first gen. And, that's again why the strength of him being McMurry made. He's born in Franklin County. If you've ever been from Dallas on I-30 and you're going up to Texarkana, going to Little Rock, this little town, Mount Vernon, is right off of I-30. And he's around in that particular area where he was born in 1907. I was able to find his birth certificate, described as white, mentions father, mother, farmer, in terms of this kind of birth. Now, I also was able to find out that he has 3 brothers. So there was, a pretty healthy farm family of 4 boys. So definitely farm family. He is the eldest son. He's a Methodist. And I've been able to establish that he went to Mount Vernon elementary and secondary education there. But then truly lost about anything else. I do not know what his aspirations were. I first thought maybe he wanted to be a Methodist minister. I don't think that's the case. I did not know what his future was in store in terms of these kind of early years. However, I do know that the fall of 1928, and it's age 20, not age 18, he's literally headed to McMurry. I love that photograph because it's always struck me as that we kind of threw a building up and hope they will come and we'll survive. But that's Old Main in 1923. So we've got this guy, and I think this next slide will say, I'm not sure how this happened, but I do think it proved to be transformational for this young guy. I only have assumptions. I do know that he was in the Methodist Church. This is our first president, and I think he was probably just scouring around literally the area trying to get somebody to come to McMurry. But I don't know, did he show up at the Methodist Church in Mount Vernon? I'm not sure. But somehow Dan Dobson got on this. I don't know if he got on this radar, but we got on Dan Dobson's radar. And literally, he's going to spend the next 7 years. Again, why I'm thinking that it truly McMurry made. It's not just 4 years. It's going to spend the next 7 years at McMurry. And I was able to go back and look at the different annuals, and you see this kind of progression of this young man. But he's there from 28 to 31 as a student. And also when you go back and look there, I would definitely want to say, I think he came in extremely green. He's 20 years old, but I think he's going to leave a seasoned 28-year-old. And I'm going to argue that he's going to get a skill set that's going to serve him well for the rest of his career and his life. And truly, I think McMurry made. Now, you can then go back, because these annuals are pretty informative. Here's Dan Dobson, his junior year. He's been here for 3 years, and I don't know if you can see all that, but he was apparently we had a press club. Guess what? All 3 years he was involved in the press club. He was president of the press club, so he started taking on leadership roles. We had a thespian club that he was a member of for those 3 years. Lay activities, 2 years. He was on the War Hoop staff, Totem staff, editor of Totem that particular year, member of IHR, Publications Council, scholarships. And here's his senior year. Notice he's an English major. Again, all these particular things, we just kind of continued all of these particular roles. It gets into his senior year, he's been the editor 29, 30, and 31 of the Totem. So very interesting. You can't really see that, but it does say, as dawn over the campus, he's known to arguing things he's very much prone. His hi there fellow, full of good cheer, will re-echo in memories many a year. In terms of that particular year. Now, he's going to graduate in 31. He was a major in English, so definitely want to keep that in mind here in a minute. But for the next 3 years, he's going to stay here. I'm not sure where the bookstore was, but he was the manager of the bookstore at McMurry. But he also even had his wooden shack. I didn't know if it. Okay, it was not in Old Main. No. Okay, okay. That's where. But he also was an instructor, so he was probably teaching. I would think English in terms of his particular thing. But McMurry provided him this kind of ability to, to kind of find his roots, get settled in terms of literally before he's ready to launch off. Now, this is 1934 at Dr. Hunt's funeral, and since Dan Dobson was a male instructor at McMurry, he's one of the pallbearers, which is another amazing photograph. They're coming out of Old Main right here, and the only building out there, that's President's Hall right there. But they're getting ready to go to St. Paul. Now, you can't interrupt me, but go ahead. Because I'm already 15 minutes in.
Only half of President's Hall because the other half wasn't built.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. This is 30. That's the good side of the building. But yeah, that's just amazing, that particular photo. But Dan Dobson is one of these pallbearers, and they're getting ready to take the Dr. Hunt down to St. Paul. Now, I also know, however, though, at age 28, he begins his graduate school journey. And his academic his focus had shifted from English to sociology, which is, I think why he got on my particular radar. I had joked a minute ago with some students I had started to make sociology a real big font, but I didn't. I kept it the same font. But I go back to the obituary in 1995. By the way, if anybody wants some of these documents, let me know. I'll make sure you get them. But I went at the end of the obituary, which probably the writer's going, how did this guy go from this to sociology? His daughter, the writer must have asked the daughter this kind of question. How'd your father end up as a sociologist? And her name is Beverly Halton, the daughter. She said her father was an English major who became so fascinated by the underlying human relationships in novels that he decided to pursue their study beyond literature. Tragically, I did not get to meet him, so I never got to ask him, how did you get to sociology? But that probably is a pretty good basis for that. But he ends up at, Southern Methodist University, and he's there for a couple of years and studying pure sociology there. I've always wondered how in the world did that happen? And guess what? I kind of go through McMurray stuff, but in the McMurray War Hoop in 1935, they talk about Dobson getting a scholarship to go to SMU to study sociology. And they kind of mentioned getting a leave of absence to do that, and then goes to SMU to work on MA degree. I think they thought he'll go get this MA degree and he'll come back to McMurray, but he doesn't come back to McMurray. He does in other capacities, but did find that particular thing in terms of SMU. I did find this. I did not, he ends up writing a master's thesis in 36 called The Role of Institutionalized Religion in Ethnic Groups of Dallas, Texas. I have not been able to see this particular thesis, but interesting title to say the least in terms of that particular thing. I do think SMU was a really good fit for him at that particular time. They had a pretty good sociology department, and it was a good training ground for him right there. But he ends up leaving there, and here's this kid from very small little town in East Texas, ends up going to New York University to go work on his PhD. And he's there for 5 years doing that particular work. And I don't know how he got there or why. I know he got a scholarship to study there. His main contact at SMU had gotten his PhD at University of Chicago, and I thought he probably would have ended up there. So I'm not sure why New York University. But literally, I do think he had always kind of this practical applied approach to sociology. SMU gives him a fellowship, or NYU gives him a fellowship, and also I think this also must have been pivotal. There was a man there called George Payne who becomes the father of educational sociology, and I think he would have attracted Dan Dobson to come to NYU there. I did find out what his dissertation was. Again, it's kind of something similar to the SMU thing. I have not been able to see this document either. But that's very sociological. When you hear people talking about causes, correlates, and consequences, you're thinking very, very sociological. But I would love to see what he did in this. He never published anything out of this particular document. Now, also, he comes back in 1941 to McMurray, and he's invited to speak to alumni. And I think it was like a celebration. Here's this young kid, comes to McMurray, goes off and gets his PhD, and comes back. So I found this in the War Hoop also. It's a beautiful little piece. It's pretty blurry, but it had to be like an idol, just loved Dan Dobson in terms of writing this particular thing. But this is like young kid, comes to McMurray, goes off, and then he comes back here, and they kind of celebrate what he had done in 1941 to get that particular degree. Now, I know he spends the next 28 years of his life as a professor at NYU, and he's going to retire in 1969. So I definitely want to say it in that kind of font, McMurray made, but I'm going to argue that the best is yet to come. 1941, he came back to be celebrated, but he's really going to do things that hadn't happened before, and truly, and I'm going to argue it's come from that foundation at McMurry. Now, just a few examples. At NYU, there was a Journal of Educational Sociology there, started by Dr. Payne. And you'll kind of get this little transition, but guess who used his editorial skills working on the McMurry's War Whoop and Totem, and he ends up editing this journal from 1943 to 1963. It's Dan Dobson. That's impressive enough in terms of just pulling off this quarterly journal in New York. But this was really impactful, that he does take a leave of absence from NYU, his professorship, and he's going to work on the New York City Mayor's Community on Unity. And he does this for 1944 to 1946. Interestingly enough, in 1946, he writes an article about his experience in the journal that he's editing, but it's really, really informative in terms of that. That's how it kind of starts, but they've had kind of riots, racial, ethnic conflict in New York City. The mayor wants to do something about that, creates this committee, and literally it says down here, they kind of get going, and they finally elect an executive director a little later. And guess who that executive director is other than, it is our guy, Dan Dobson, becomes this executive director of this particular community. And so he's using these organizational leadership skills that he would have honed back here at McMurry. In this article, he writes some stuff. He's real kind of linear writer. He'll go 1, 2, 3, but he does talk about kind of the things that they were doing. They were going to investigate and make recommendations, recommend action to resolve these neighborhood situations. So he's very community, neighborhood focused. Also advising groups and agencies how to adapt their programs to meet the new demands created by racial or religious conflicts. And also this big thing of literally thinking about investigations, doing studies. This is the most important thing here for his, would not have predicted what was going to happen. But he's on this particular mayor's committee and comes in, and the mayor brings up the subject about trying to integrate blacks into Major League Baseball. And it mentions here that they create like a subcommittee. Yeah, a subcommittee was set up by the mayor. And guess who's on that subcommittee but Dan Dobson. But also, he's going to rub shoulders with a fellow Methodist, a fellow Methodist college graduate, also somebody very concerned with racial unity, and none other than that becomes Branch Rickey, that he is literally on this subcommittee with. Branch Rickey is 1943, moves to New York City, where he is going to become the president and general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And many years later, for many years, he'd always wanted to racially integrate Major League Baseball. And here's Ebbets Field, where Brooklyn played. And I think the next slide is him signing Jackie Robinson to a 1945 Brooklyn Dodgers contract. You would not know where Dan Dobson was in all this, but in '54, in the journal that he's editing, he does write an article talking about the whole experience. And it's called The Integration of Negroes in Baseball. And he mentions this idea that he served as an advisor to Branch Rickey in terms of those particular aspects, in terms of what he actually did. But he was definitely a silent figure in kind of getting this to figure out how we can racially integrate baseball. And they do this with Jackie Robinson. Now, I would say that was, significant thing that he actually did in terms of kind of that kind of silent role that he played. But he's going to come back to teaching at NYU in 1946, and he does not retire in 1969. So literally, and if you go, what's he do for the next 23 years? And if you go back and look at the New York Times editorial, just the sheer fact that it's titled Foe and Scholar of Racism, talking about this particular thing. But they do mention here, known as a philosopher of intergroup relations, for a torrent of scholarly research papers he produced as the director of NYU Center for Human Relations Studies. So he becomes literally around the country as a leading expert, but not on racial segregation in the South, but in the North. And he conducts numerous studies, writes numerous reports, and it goes back to trying to think about racial tensions in communities and schools. White Plains has trouble in their schools. They hire him to kind of come in to be a consultant. New Rochelle does the same thing. Mount Vernon, New York, Englewood, New Jersey, and he also gets involved in Levittown, Pennsylvania, and many other times that he kind of comes in to be kind of an expert witness about trying to reduce racial tensions. And these are several different documents that he would have written that were kind of reports back to these particular schools. In '57, he does this particular thing. I hope I play a few minutes of this here in a minute, where they've had tension in a suburb, Levittown, a suburb in Pennsylvania. A black couple moves into the particular suburb, causes turmoil. Who do they bring in but Dan Dobson to try to deal with this? And he kind of narrates this particular video that I'll play a minute here in a minute. This is literally, Robert Penn Warren had done a program called Who Speaks for the Negro, and in 1964, he actually interviewed Dan Dobson. It's only audio, but you can get it online through that particular thing. So, I'm going to conclude that Dan Dobson could be considered the most important McMurry alumni. We celebrate him in 1941, and that's still very early. We give him an honorary doctorate in 1957. He comes back in '92 to become a distinguished alum. And we just recognized him in the McMurry 100 in terms of his particular role. But I also, I wanted another kind of concluding thing. I wanted to kind of keep this at the end. We know that he retired in 1969. And I had been trying to get some documents from NYU. That's where his papers are. And Keith, I had contacted them wanting to get this particular program. And Keith was able to get this for me. And I don't know who had seen this since 1969. But this is the program for his kind of an evening in tribute. He signed it. Great little bio there. And then this is the first time I'd ever seen any evidence with him and Jackie Robinson. But Jackie Robinson signs this because he was there that night. And Jackie Robinson is here. Some of the students here are members of Alpha Kappa Delta, the International Sociology Honor Society. And Dan Dobson was getting an award from AKD. And who did it? But it was presented by Jackie Robinson. And I don't know any, I've never been able to find anything. Also, Kenneth Clark is there, and I'll mention him here in a second. But I don't know what he had to say, but he is talking about the role of the behavioral scientist in social change. There's Jackie Robinson. This is Kenneth Clark, who was monumental for literally the Brown versus Board of Education, the work that he had actually done in terms of that. I want to kind of quickly end. I want to play a minute from this 1957 documentary where I said he kind of came in to be this kind of witness in terms of things that go on. So let me see if I can pull this up. I'm going to play just a minute, but I want you to listen to his deep, what I think still is a very deep Southern accent, even though he had been in New York for quite a while. I want to get right where I want to be. Where's my little... that should be. Okay. I'm going to go Plan B, and let me go get the actual document.
Midway between Philadelphia and Trenton, New Jersey, was a giant shopping center, winding lanes named for flowers and food, and fairly typical of communities all over America, where families are pursuing the American dream to give their children a better chance in life. Levittowners are people of modest means. Nearly all are young people. A large proportion are veterans. There are few social agencies, and while many religious groups have established churches, they have not yet had time enough to develop programs to adequately serve the community. Most Levittowners are proud and happy in their new environment. For many, it is the first house of their own, and it represents a major financial investment. Social life is mainly confined to visits with the neighbors. Occasionally, there are community-wide events, but it's too early yet for most residents to become identified with the broader aspects of community living. Levittown was built by one man for whom it is named. Like many community developers, he set the initial policy and provided a minimum of essential services. When the houses were sold, naturally he went to its own slender resources. In August 1957, Levittown, Pennsylvania attracted international attention when violence erupted as William Myers, Jr. and his family moved into the three-bedroom house at Daffodil and Deep Green Lane. In almost all respects, the Myers family is close to the Levittown norm. They have 3 small children, the youngest only 1 month old. Myers served for 2.5 years in the Army and was discharged as a staff sergeant. He works as a laboratory technician and is studying for a degree as an electrical engineer. His wife, Daisy, is a college graduate. The Myers home is modestly furnished, and their late model family car was bought on time. They are very close to the Levittown norm, except in one respect. William Myers, Jr. and his family are Negroes in an all-white community. Levittown reacted in a number of ways to the new arrival. There were several hundred who congregated on the street in front of the Myers house, and there were those among them who felt strongly enough to throw a rock through the picture window.
I'll stop there. I love the way he says picture window. Thought that would work, but it didn't. So, anybody have any questions or comments?
What did he recommend? What did he recommend?
This was more like he would, I think somebody interviewed the people, but then he would actually it would be sitting at that desk. It would be like what he recommended to Branch Rickey, that if you give some kind of joint task that they can actually work toward, then that literally would overcome the racial tension that would happen. And I assume that's what he's going to recommend in terms of that, to maybe be able to make that happen.
Was the family able to stay?
Yeah, they were able to stay, but it's still very, very tension in 1957.
How long did it take you to compile all this information anyway?
I'd been thinking off and on for a while, but probably when Terry prompted me, and then it's so nice to be able to go online and you can go in and look at the war hoops, and then you can search, look at Dobson and find particular things that I had never seen those particular documents. So probably in the last year where I'd been kind of thinking deeply about it.
1 year?
Yeah, but I really, he got on my radar in about 95, 96. We actually renamed our senior award in sociology. We call it now the Dan Dobson Award. So that was probably about 96, 97 when I realized, whoa, who this guy was. But it had been kind of off and on, but not seriously thinking deep about it. But I do wish I had met him, because some of you know Weldon Crowley, who was a Southwestern professor. And when we moved here in 90, my wife went to an Alzheimer's event at one of the churches here in town. Probably would have been 1990 fall. And who did she run into but Lola Bennett, President Bennett's wife. And so Rosemary came home and said, met the former president's wife, and she's got a daughter-in-law and son-in-law that live in Georgetown at Southwestern. And Rosemary goes, but she takes the bus down to Georgetown. And I don't know if you ever knew Lola Bennett, but she's a very prim, proper lady. And I told Rosemary, I said, there's no way that I'm going to let that lady ride the Greyhound bus down to Georgetown. So probably what I'm getting at, spring of 91, we drive her down to Georgetown, drop her off, spend a couple of days in Austin, come back, spend the night with the Crowleys. But Weldon never once said, have you ever heard of Dan Dobson? Because he's a scholar in residence at Southwestern. And now this was like 91, so maybe Dan Dobson was, a little advanced in his age. But I wish he had said that, because I would have said, well, I'm spending another day here in Austin, in the Georgetown area, because I want to meet this guy. But so I did not get to meet him, and I think if I had met him then it would have, and been much deeper in terms of trying to figure out his biography. Yes.
You talked a lot about what he did in the 40s and 50s, but the end of his career at NYU, same time as the civil rights.
Oh, yeah.
Civil rights. What kind of involvement did he have?
It was all in the North, and those reports that I mentioned were all written after Brown versus Board of Education, and probably 65, 64 is literally when he was doing that kind of writing. So he was getting contacted by school systems that were having trouble. He would come in and write a report about it. But yeah, he was definitely involved on that particular thing, but not as strong as you think he would have been. I do know that he met like W.E. Du Bois, but I have never gotten anything where he actually had interacted with Martin Luther King, which I'm sure he probably would have, but I can't confirm that.
His connections with the Protestant churches in New York, the churches of color, probably put him in touch with Mother Zion, Methodist Church there, and Abyssinian Baptist Church, Adam Clayton Powell, and those kinds of figures. When the event where you show Jackie Robinson's signature, where and when was that event? That's
in 1969 at NYU, at his retirement event. And that's the first time that I knew they knew each other, but it was the first time that kind of connection in terms of that. If you go back and look at the New York Times editorial, they mentioned that when he first moved to New York, they lived in Harlem. So there's a very good chance that he would have been at that particular church. I think he went to Christ Church Methodist, which is on Park Avenue, and I think that's maybe where he met Branch Rickey also.
Those churches that I mentioned are like 200 years old, established 200 years ago.
Yeah. But I don't know, I have not been able to see the dissertation that he would have done, but it did like looking at kind of ethnic communities and things like that. Yes, sir.
So how did he spend his time once he came back to Texas? He came back in 72?
Yeah, it's a blur. Because he came back in 72, so, and it says, he was, because I also have the Austin American Statesman obituary, and it talked that he was a resident scholar at Southwestern, but I don't you know, he could have had 20 years there, but I don't know, do not know what happened. Because I don't, Gary, do you know when Weldon ended up at Southwestern?
It would have been
About the,
in the 1960s.
yeah, so, you know, Weldon Crowley would have, you know, definitely would have crossed paths with him, so.
Was Dr. Dobson never a member of the board of directors for, or trustees for McMurry?
I've seen something that said that he was, but I haven't been able to establish that.
The reason
He
I
may have
ask-
been, but
The reason I ask is because somebody had to say to somebody along the way that McMurry might consider admitting African American students, and I'd like to
Oh, yeah.
pin that on.
Yeah.
on Dobson.
He was here in '57 to get an honorary doctorate. But
I
yeah,
arrived in 1959, so
I know.
He said something.
I hope so, but I couldn't confirm that. Yes, sir.
Questions. What do you mean when you say educational sociology?
It's like you study schools, and it's a very niche area. And like at where I was at Columbia was pure soc, but we also had teachers college, and they had their own kind of educational sociology. So it's a very applied, practical thing that's very school focused in terms of the orientation.
Okay. And my other question is, do you know when the Library Endowment Fund was named for Dan Dobson?
When what?
When the Library Endowment Fund, the McMurry
Yeah, no.
Fund is named for Dan Dobson.
Yeah, I haven't been able to pursue that, but sure, yeah. Okay. No, okay. We were talking about V.O. Key earlier.
Sarah Weddington.
Yeah, Sarah Weddington, in terms, you know, just amazing alums. It's the. I think they would have been successful wherever they would have, you know, gone in terms of schooling because of their family background. But you get this guy that was came from farm, and don't know how he got here. That's what I would, but he got here, and it became this amazing. He had amazing skill set to bring. So he was definitely a big fish in a small pond. But I don't know if he had gone to SMU that we would be talking about him like we would today in terms of that kind of what happened. He was able to be this editor, come in and literally kind of take this guy and give him about 7 years to really kind of mature in terms of that kind of thing. So
I may have missed that, but you were talking about him coming from very strong farm stock, but when you're showing the dates for his parents, it looked like his mother died a lot earlier than his father.
yeah, she died 19, like 2 years after the fourth son was born. So I think the father actually did remarry.
Yeah, but it seemed like,
Yeah.
yeah, but for it sounded like she had a premature.
Oh yeah. She probably would have been 35 or 40 maybe when she died. So yeah.
Not unusual.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? I have a question to myself. I really admire him, but I don't know what kind of professor he was. Because I couldn't say, oh my gosh, Morris Baker is his student. So I don't. That's the other thing about the kind of educational sociology. If you'd go 20 blocks up Broadway to Columbia, which became the center of sociology in the 1940s and 50s, I never got a sense that he ever visited any of the sociologists at Columbia. And there are 15 people that had graduated from Columbia during that time period that went on to become professors and also presidents of the American Sociological Association. So I know Dobson was a professor, but I don't know, who who he impacted. So I don't know that particular impact. I don't know if he was on the undergraduate level, on the graduate level in terms of that. But in terms of being a scholar, very applied type person, you know, did some amazing stuff. But the idea of his legacy academically, I don't know what it is. I haven't been able to establish that. You'd say, whoa, that's his student.
Pretty neat. Our student teaching evaluations of SMU.
Well, yeah, I would. But it did say in one of the McMurry things that, you know, he was, you know, even as a, you know, just graduated from college, he was considered one of the most, you know, delightful teachers at McMurry. So.
So how was it that he was, so it sounds like it was critical that he was put on this New York City committee. So was it happenstance?
Yeah, I think, huh? Yeah, the mayor is going to create it. Actually, the guy that is the executive director initially was like a Supreme Court justice, had retired, Evans. But I don't know, you know, how they, you know, Dobson doesn't write about that in 46, you know, how, because they, you know, there were 4 Jews, 4 Catholic, you know, they tried to come up with a different kind of composition about the community. But I don't know how he, you know, dropped out of this you know, kind of, and became kind of the representative kind of academia. But I don't know how that happened, but it was monumental in terms of literally what happened to him and who he rubbed shoulders with.
It's interesting that this small town person
Like a ranger.
became a powerhouse in bringing diverse cultures together, having come from a place that probably had not many cultural outlets.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really amazing. There's a quote, I think, on the program in terms of, you know, some of his kind of quotes, things like that. But and even in the New York Times, they talk about that he kind of grew up in this kind of racial culture, but literally dropped those off. And he even says something like, you know, that once he learned new facts, he just kind of dropped that stuff. So definitely, there had been that kind of journey in terms of that. So, but and it probably would have happened once he got to SMU. And then definitely when we got to NYU in terms of that kind of experience.
Yeah. You mentioned this, that NYU has this papers. Do you have any idea what exactly they have?
Keith, what, like 2 boxes of stuff. It looked like most of his writings. And so I could get most of those writings, you know, PDFs, other places. So it didn't seem to be too biographical, but when I saw the program, you know, that's the one document that I wanted to take a look at. But so there's not much. I assume, you know, they would have all the educational sociology editorial stuff that he had been doing. So there had been those kind of letters, but I do not know much other than I need to get to New York and I'll look at those documents.
So there's never been a biography.
You probably can.
No.
But you probably can locate that stuff.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff is public domain, but then there, you know, even if you look at his writing, he's very, kind of very personal writer, you know, the way he writes, but he doesn't write too much about himself. So you think there, you know, you think there's going to be some nugget there, and you don't find it. So that's why I would have loved to have been able to chat with him.
It'd also be interesting to
Yeah.
know about his, you know, his family. He had 3 brothers.
Yeah.
And it looked like one of them died.
Yeah. Even, you know, what happened to the other kids?
Well, and did they marry?
Yeah.
And did, you know, so he's got nephews, nieces, and the family goes. Do they have any information that's been passed on?
Yeah. And he has a son. I think that's why he ends up at Austin. His son was a lawyer in Austin area, so that's why he's there. His son died, I think, 2017. So, and I think the daughter may still be alive, but I'm not sure where she lives.
They
So,
have kids.
yeah,
It
yeah,
might be interesting to talk to Pat Crowley.
yeah,
Pat might know.
yeah,
That's the one.
yeah, yeah. Reception? Oh,
Another
Gary.
possibility might be if they've got in their personnel office or the academic offices at NYU, you know, personnel files for Dobson, because we've got stuff here at McMurry for professors going way back.
Yeah.
And we had a request several years ago, a guy who was working on a former English professor at McMurray and wanted to know what was in her personnel file.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
Thank you.
You guys are showing up. Thank you, folks. We have some light receptions out at the, down here on the first floor. And you're welcome to stick around, make yourself at home in the library. It's got the best AC in Abilene.